Heavenly Father, I pray for everyone watching this video right now. May you bless them with peace, joy, and breakthroughs in their lives. Amen. Hello, my wonderful family. I am so glad and grateful to have you here with me today. Your support means the world, and I truly don't take it for granted. Before we dive into today's powerful story, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update from this channel. I should have known Marcus would destroy everything beautiful in my life the moment he got the chance. Asterisk. The thought hit Victoria sterling like ice water as she watched her husband's cruel smile spread across his face, his words still echoing through the hushed ballroom of their daughter's wedding reception. Her father stood frozen at the microphone, his prepared toast forgotten, 200 guests staring at him with expressions ranging from pity to secondhand embarrassment. "I'm sorry, Harold," Marcus had just announced loud enough for every person in the room to hear. "But I think we all know that a man who filed for bankruptcy twice probably shouldn't be giving advice about building a lasting foundation." Victoria felt her champagne glass slip from nerveless fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the terrible silence. Her daughter Rebecca, radiant in her grandmother's vintage wedding dress just moments before, now stood beside her new husband with tears streaming down her face. 23 years of marriage, and this is how he chooses to show his true nature. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Victoria whispered, but her voice was lost in the collective intake of breath from guests who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Harold Chun, her father, the man who'd worked 3 jobs to put Victoria through college, who'd rebuilt his small construction business from nothing not once but twice, who'd walked her down the aisle with quiet dignity despite knowing Marcus had never respected him, stood at the podium looking smaller than Victoria had ever seen him. "I just think," Marcus continued with the satisfied tone of a man delivering a perfectly timed business presentation, "that when we're celebrating new beginnings, we should be honest about the kind of foundation we're building on." Victoria watched her father's face cycle through shock, hurt, and finally something that looked like resigned acceptance. Harold had spent 23 years enduring Marcus's subtle condescensions, his backhanded compliments, his carefully veiled suggestions that Rebecca and Victoria deserved better than a blue-collar grandfather and father. But this wasn't subtle. This was deliberate, calculated humiliation designed to put Harold in his place once and for all. "Dad," Rebecca called out, her voice breaking, "please continue your toast." Harold looked at his granddaughter with infinite love and infinite sadness. "I think perhaps your stepfather is right, sweetheart. I should let someone more qualified speak about building lasting foundations." The resignation in his voice broke something fundamental in Victoria's chest. She watched her father, this man who'd survived war, poverty, business failures, and personal losses with his dignity intact, accept defeat from a man who'd never faced a real challenge in his privileged life. Asterisk, how did I let this happen? How did I stand by for 23 years while Marcus slowly eroded my father's confidence? Asterisk. "Actually," Victoria heard herself saying, her voice cutting through the awkward silence like a blade, "I think my father is exactly the right person to talk about foundations." Marcus turned to stare at her, his confident expression flickering with something that might have been surprise. "Victoria, perhaps we should." "Marcus." Victoria's voice was steady, almost conversational, but something in her tone made the entire ballroom fall silent. "Sit down." The command was delivered with such quiet authority that Marcus actually took a step backward. Victoria had spent 23 years being the perfect corporate wife, managing his image, smoothing over his social missteps, ensuring that his success looked effortless and his personality appeared charming. But the woman standing in that ballroom was someone new, someone forged in the heat of watching the man she loved destroy the man who'd given her life. "Harold," Victoria said, moving toward the podium with deliberate grace, "please continue your toast. I think everyone here would benefit from hearing what you have to say about building something that lasts." Victoria's father looked at her with confusion and growing hope. "Victoria, are you sure?" "I'm sure." Victoria reached the microphone and turned to face the room full of guests. Marcus's business associates, society friends, and family members who'd spent years watching this slow-motion power struggle play out. "But first, I have something I'd like to share with everyone." Marcus was moving toward her now, his face pale with what looked like genuine alarm. "Victoria, this isn't the time or place." "Actually, Marcus, this is exactly the time and place." Victoria's smile was sharp as broken glass. You chose to make this public, so let's keep it public. She looked around the ballroom at faces she recognized. People who'd smiled at her for decades while silently judging her father. People who'd accepted Marcus's money and influence while whispering about Victoria's humble origins. My father, Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room, is a man who built his first business with a loan from his grandmother's jewelry box. He's a man who lost everything in 2008 when his biggest client declared bankruptcy and still paid every single one of his workers their final paychecks from his personal savings. Victoria could see Harold's eyes filling with tears, but she wasn't finished. My father is a man who worked 3 jobs so I could attend Stanford University without student loans. A man who taught me that real wealth isn't about money. It's about integrity, loyalty, and the courage to rebuild when life knocks you down. The room was absolutely silent now, every guest riveted by the quiet passion in Victoria's voice. And Marcus, Victoria said, turning to face her husband directly, my father is a man who would never, under any circumstances, use someone's moment of vulnerability to make himself feel powerful. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Marcus's face was cycling through expressions, anger, calculation, and something that looked almost like fear. Victoria, he said carefully, I think you're overreacting to what was meant as gentle guidance. Gentle guidance? Victoria's laugh was sharp and mirthless. Marcus, you just announced to 200 people that my father is unqualified to speak about lasting foundations. At our daughter's wedding, in front of his granddaughter, on what should be one of the happiest days of our family's life. She paused, letting the weight of his actions settle over the room. So let me tell you about foundations, Marcus. Real foundations. The kind that don't crumble the moment someone tests them. Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling to something she'd prepared but never thought she'd use. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, I'd like to share some information about foundations. Specifically, about the Sterling Foundation for Educational Excellence, which has provided scholarships to over 300 students from working-class families over the past 10 years. Marcus's face went white. Victoria, what are you doing? I'm talking about foundations, Marcus. The foundation that's been funded entirely by my trust fund, my inheritance from my grandmother, and the profits from the investment portfolio I've been managing separately from our joint accounts for 15 years. The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Victoria could see understanding dawning on several faces. People who'd assumed Marcus was the source of all their family's charitable giving, all their philanthropic success. I'm talking about the foundation that's been operating anonymously because my father taught me that real generosity doesn't seek recognition. Victoria looked directly at her father, seeing pride and amazement replacing the hurt in his eyes. But you know what, Dad? I think it's time we stopped being anonymous. I think it's time everyone knew exactly who's been quietly building lasting foundations in this community. She touched her phone screen, and suddenly the ballroom's displays, meant to show wedding photos, filled with images of scholarship recipients, new construction projects, and community programs, all bearing her father's construction company logo alongside the Sterling Foundation emblem. Harold Chin Construction, Victoria announced, has been the primary contractor for every single one of our foundation's building projects. Because when I wanted to build schools and community centers and affordable housing, I didn't hire the lowest bidder or the most prestigious firm. Victoria's voice grew stronger with each word. I hired the man who taught me that quality work comes from caring about the people who'll use what you build. I hired the man who's never missed a deadline, never cut corners, and never charged more than his work was worth. The room was staring at Harold with new understanding, seeing him not as Marcus's embarrassing father-in-law, but as Victoria's chosen partner in building something meaningful. So Marcus, Victoria said, turning back to her husband, when you talk about foundations, when you suggest that my father isn't qualified to give advice about building something that lasts, you're not just insulting him. Victoria's smile was beautiful and terrifying. You're insulting the man whose work has created lasting change in this community while you've been busy acquiring companies and moving money around without creating anything of real value. Marcus looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Victoria, we should discuss this privately. We've discussed things privately for 23 years, Marcus. And privately, you've made it clear that you think my father is beneath our family's standards. Privately, you've suggested that Rebecca and I should be embarrassed by our humble origins. Victoria paused, looking around the room at guests who were hanging on every word. So I thought it was time we discussed things publicly. I thought it was time everyone knew exactly what kind of foundation our family was really built on. She gestured toward her father, who was standing straighter now, his dignity restored by the truth his daughter had just revealed. The foundation of a man who taught his daughter that real power comes from lifting other people up, not tearing them down. The foundation of a man who showed me that true wealth is measured by what you build, not what you buy. Victoria looked directly at Marcus, and something in her expression made him step backward. And the foundation of a woman who's been building her own empire for 15 years while letting everyone assume it belonged to her husband. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria could see the implications hitting faces throughout the room. If Victoria had been funding their major charitable work independently, if her father's company had been doing the actual construction, if her own investment success had been financing their family's philanthropic reputation. Marcus, Victoria said quietly, you wanted to talk about foundations at our daughter's wedding. You wanted to make sure everyone understood exactly what kind of foundation we're building on. Victoria's smile was radiant and devastating. Well, now they do. The aftermath of Victoria's revelation rippled through the ballroom like wildfire. Guests clustered in urgent whispered conversations while Marcus stood frozen, his carefully crafted public image crumbling in real time. Victoria felt a hand on her arm and turned to see her daughter Rebecca approaching, her wedding makeup streaked with tears. Mom, Rebecca said quietly, is all of this true? About the foundation, about Grandpa's company? Victoria felt her heart break as she realized her own daughter had been living with the same misconceptions about their family that everyone else had. Yes, sweetheart. All of it. But I thought Dad was the one funding all the charitable work. I thought. Rebecca's voice trailed off as she processed the implications. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? Before Victoria could answer, Marcus's business partner William Foster appeared at her elbow, his expression tight with something that looked like panic. Victoria, William said urgently, we need to discuss this privately. There are legal implications to what you've just revealed that I don't think you understand. Victoria studied William's face, seeing something in his expression that made her stomach clench with sudden dread. What kind of legal implications? The kind that involve tax fraud, financial misrepresentation, and about 12 different SEC violations, William said, his voice barely above a whisper. Victoria, do you have any idea what you've just admitted to? The words hit Victoria like ice water. She looked around the ballroom, seeing her father's proud expression, Rebecca's confused hurt, and Marcus's growing calculation as he realized that Victoria might have just exposed herself to criminal liability. William, Victoria said carefully, what exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that announcing you've been running a multi-million-dollar foundation using undisclosed assets while your husband files joint tax returns claiming charitable deductions might not have been the smartest move. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face as she realized what William was implying. If Marcus had been claiming tax deductions for charitable work that Victoria was funding independently, if their joint financial filings didn't reflect her separate foundation activities, if her investment portfolio had been generating income that wasn't properly reported. You son of a bitch, Victoria whispered, understanding hitting her like lightning. You knew. Both of you knew. Marcus was moving toward them now, his expression shifting from shock to something that looked almost like satisfaction. Victoria, I think we should take this conversation somewhere private. No. Victoria's voice was growing stronger, drawing power from anger and the dawning realization that she'd been played more thoroughly than she'd ever imagined. William, how long have you known about my foundation? William glanced desperately at Marcus, clearly seeking guidance on how much to reveal. Victoria, that's not important right now. What's important is controlling the damage from. How long? Victoria's voice cut through his evasion like a blade. 3 years, William admitted. We've known for 3 years. The betrayal hit Victoria like a physical blow. 3 years. Marcus had known about her independent charitable work, her separate investments, her financial autonomy, and he'd said nothing while continuing to accept credit for philanthropy she was funding. Mom, Rebecca said, her voice small and confused. What's happening? Victoria looked at her daughter, seeing innocence that was about to be shattered, and felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. What's happening, sweetheart, is that your mother is learning some very interesting things about her marriage. She turned to face Marcus directly. You've been claiming my charitable work as joint activities for tax purposes while letting everyone believe you were the source of our family's philanthropic reputation. Victoria, it's more complicated than that. Is it? Victoria pulled out her phone, scrolling through documents she'd never thought she'd need as weapons. Marcus, these are the financial records for every charitable deduction you've claimed over the past 5 years. Would you like to explain to our daughter how you've been deducting donations you never made? Marcus's face went white. Victoria, you're making accusations you can't prove. Can I? Victoria turned her phone screen toward the small group that had gathered around them. Rebecca, William, Harold, and several other family members who'd been drawn by the obvious tension. These are bank records showing that every single major charitable donation claimed on our joint tax returns came from my personal accounts. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. Victoria watched comprehension dawn on Rebecca's face, watched her daughter realize that the father she'd idolized had been taking credit for generosity he'd never shown. But that's fraud, Rebecca said quietly. Dad, that's tax fraud. It's a misunderstanding, Marcus said quickly. A paperwork error that can be corrected. Victoria's laugh was sharp and bitter. A paperwork error that's been happening for 5 years? Marcus, you've been systematically stealing credit for charitable work you never funded while claiming tax deductions for money you never donated. Harold stepped closer to his daughter, his protective instincts overriding years of careful deference to Marcus. Victoria, what can we do to help? The simple question, asked without judgment, without conditions, with only love and loyalty, brought tears to Victoria's eyes. Here was her father, still offering support after being publicly humiliated, still believing in her ability to handle whatever crisis she was facing. Dad, you've done enough, Victoria said softly. You raised a daughter who's been building her own empire while everyone assumed it belonged to someone else. But even as she spoke the words, Victoria could see Marcus calculating something, could see him moving from defense to offense as he realized that attacking might be his best strategy. Victoria, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly enough for nearby guests to hear. I think you're having some kind of emotional breakdown. The stress of Rebecca's wedding, the pressure of managing our social obligations. Don't. Victoria's voice was deadly quiet. Marcus, don't you dare try to gaslight me in front of our daughter. I'm trying to help you understand that you're making accusations based on emotional trauma rather than facts. Facts. Victoria's voice was rising now, drawing attention from guests throughout the ballroom. Would you like facts, Marcus? Would you like me to share some facts with everyone here? She held up her phone, finger hovering over something that made Marcus go pale. These are the real financial records for Sterling Industries. Not the sanitized versions you show investors, but the actual numbers that show how your company has been performing over the past 5 years. Marcus lunged toward her phone, but Victoria stepped back smoothly, protected by Harold and several other family members who'd moved to support her. Victoria, those are confidential business documents. Are they? Because according to the corporate filings I've been reviewing, I own 43% of Sterling Industries through inheritance and investment accounts that predate our marriage. The revelation hit the gathered group like a bomb. Victoria could see understanding dawning on multiple faces. If Victoria owned nearly half of Marcus's company, if her money had been funding their charitable reputation, if her father's construction work had been creating the actual community impact. Which means, Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, that when you decided to humiliate my father at our daughter's wedding, when you chose to make him feel small and worthless in front of everyone we know, you weren't just attacking him. Victoria looked around at the faces staring at her with growing amazement and respect. You were attacking your business partner. You were attacking the woman whose money has been keeping your company solvent while you've been making increasingly risky investments with funds you don't actually control. William was backing away now, clearly recognizing that this situation had escalated beyond anything he'd prepared for. Marcus, we should call the lawyers. Yes, Victoria said with deadly satisfaction. You should definitely call the lawyers. Because I think they're going to have some very interesting questions about financial misrepresentation, partnership agreements, and about 12 different forms of fraud. Rebecca was staring at her parents with growing horror. Mom, Dad, what is happening to our family? Victoria felt her heart break for her daughter, but she also knew that Rebecca deserved to understand the truth about the people who'd raised her. What's happening, sweetheart? is that your mother is finally standing up for herself after 23 years of being underestimated by a man who's been stealing credit for her work while undermining her family." Victoria turned to Marcus, seeing fear and calculation warring in his expression. "But Marcus, here's what you never understood about foundations. Real foundations, the kind my father taught me to build, they're not just about money or appearances or social status." Victoria's smile was beautiful and terrifying. "They're about integrity. And when someone attacks the foundation, when they try to destroy the people who built it, when they mistake kindness for weakness and patience for stupidity." Victoria gestured toward the displays still showing images of scholarship recipients and community projects, toward Harold standing proud and protective beside her, toward Rebecca, who was beginning to see her mother as someone entirely new. "The foundation doesn't crumble. It reveals exactly how strong it really was all along." But as Victoria spoke, she could see something in Marcus's expression that suggested this confrontation was far from over. Something that looked like triumph mixed with desperation, as if he had one more card to play that would change everything. "Victoria," Marcus said quietly, "before you destroy our marriage and our family in front of everyone we know, there's something you should know about your foundation. Something you should know about those scholarship recipients you're so proud of." The words hit Victoria like ice water. "What are you talking about?" Marcus's smile was cruel and satisfied. "I'm talking about the fact that 3 of your scholarship recipients have been arrested for drug trafficking in the past 6 months. I'm talking about the fact that your foundation has been used to launder money for criminal organizations that I've been trying to investigate and stop." The accusation hit the room like a bomb. Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her feet as she realized that Marcus wasn't just fighting back. He was suggesting that her life's work, her proudest achievement, had been corrupted in ways she'd never imagined. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Is it?" Marcus's voice was growing stronger, more confident. "Victoria, did you really think you could run a multi-million-dollar foundation without proper oversight? Did you really believe that criminals wouldn't find ways to exploit your naive generosity?" Victoria felt 23 years of marriage, 15 years of careful financial planning, and her entire understanding of her own competence crashing down around her. Because looking at Marcus's expression, seeing the satisfaction in his eyes, she realized that this confrontation had been planned long before tonight. And she was beginning to suspect that everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her work, and her own strength was about to be revealed as an elaborate deception. The question now wasn't whether she could destroy Marcus's reputation. It was whether he was about to destroy everything she'd spent her adult life building. The silence that followed Marcus's accusation was deafening. Victoria felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on her, felt the sudden shift in the room's energy as guests processed the possibility that the woman they'd just been admiring might be connected to criminal activity. "That's a lie," Victoria said, but even she could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. Marcus pulled out his own phone, his movements deliberate and calculated. "Is it?" "Victoria, these are FBI surveillance photos from 3 months ago. Would you like to see them?" Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen made her blood freeze. Agent Patricia Walsh, FBI Financial Crimes Division. "Don't answer it," Marcus said quickly, his expression shifting from triumph to something that looked almost like concern. "Victoria, whatever you do, don't answer that call." The urgency in his voice confused Victoria more than his accusations had. "Why not?" "Because the moment you speak to federal agents without a lawyer present, you're going to incriminate yourself in ways you don't understand." Harold stepped closer to his daughter, his protective instincts overriding his confusion. "Victoria, what is happening here?" Before Victoria could answer, Rebecca grabbed her mother's arm. "Mom, is any of this true? About the money laundering, about the foundation being used for crimes?" Victoria looked at her daughter's frightened face and realized that every choice she made in the next few minutes would determine not just her own future, but Rebecca's understanding of who her parents really were. "I don't know," Victoria said honestly. "Rebecca, I truly don't know." The admission seemed to break something in Rebecca's expression. Victoria watched her daughter process the possibility that everything she'd believed about her family, the charitable work, the business success, the solid foundation of love and integrity, might be built on criminal activity. "Mrs. Sterling?" A new voice cut through the family crisis. Victoria turned to see a man in a dark suit approaching through the crowd of guests, his demeanor radiating federal authority. "I'm Agent David Chun, FBI Financial Crimes Division." I need to speak with you immediately." Victoria felt the world tilt sideways. The FBI agent was at her daughter's wedding, which meant this wasn't a coincidence or a social call. This was an active investigation that had reached the point where federal agents were willing to make arrests at public events. "Agent Chun," Marcus said smoothly, stepping between the agent and Victoria. "I'm Marcus Sterling, Victoria's husband. I think there may be some misunderstanding here. Mr. Sterling, actually, we need to speak with you as well." Agent Chen's expression was professionally neutral, but Victoria could see something in his eyes that suggested this situation was more complex than any of them understood. "Both of you need to come with us for questioning regarding irregularities in the Sterling Foundation's financial activities." Victoria felt Harold's hand on her shoulder, felt Rebecca moving closer for protection, felt the weight of her family's fear and confusion pressing down on her. "I'm not going anywhere without a lawyer," Victoria said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "That's your right," Agent Chin confirmed. "But Mrs. Sterling, I need you to understand that we have evidence suggesting that your foundation has been used to facilitate money laundering operations involving over $15 million in illegal proceeds." The number hit Victoria like a physical blow. $15 million. Even if only a fraction of her foundation's activities had been compromised, the legal implications were staggering. "Agent Chin," Marcus said carefully, "my wife has been the victim of sophisticated financial manipulation. She's not a criminal. She's been used by people who exploited her generosity." Victoria stared at her husband, hearing something in his voice that she'd never heard before. Not condescension or calculation, but what sounded almost like genuine protectiveness. "Mr. Sterling," Agent Chin replied, "our investigation suggests that both you and your wife have been involved in activities that require federal investigation. We're prepared to conduct this interview here, or you can accompany us to our field office." Victoria looked around the ballroom, seeing her daughter's wedding reception transformed into a crime scene, seeing guests pulling out phones to record what was obviously going to become a major scandal. "We'll come with you," Victoria said quietly. "But Agent Chin, I need 5 minutes to speak with my daughter privately." "Mom, no," Rebecca said desperately. "Don't leave. Don't let them take you away from my wedding." Victoria felt her heart break as she realized that her daughter's most important day was being destroyed by consequences Victoria had never seen coming. "Sweetheart," Victoria said gently, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Whatever happens tonight, whatever you learn about your father and me, I need you to remember something." Rebecca was crying openly now, her wedding makeup ruined, her perfect day collapsed into chaos. "Remember that everything your grandfather taught me about integrity, about building things that last, about protecting the people you love, all of that is real. That foundation is real, no matter what anyone says about how it's been used." Victoria pulled Rebecca into a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair, memorizing this moment before everything changed forever. "And remember that sometimes protecting the people you love means making choices that look like betrayal, but are actually the deepest form of loyalty." She pulled back to look Rebecca in the eyes. "Trust your grandfather. Trust your instincts. And don't trust anyone who tries to convince you that your mother is a criminal." "Mrs. Sterling," Agent Chin said gently, "we really need to go." Victoria turned to Harold, seeing 23 years of quiet support and unconditional love in his expression. "Dad, take care of Rebecca. Whatever happens, whatever comes out in the investigation, protect her from the worst of it." "Victoria," Harold said, his voice thick with emotion, "you're the strongest person I know. You'll get through this." But as Victoria moved toward Agent Chin, Marcus caught her arm. "Victoria, before we go, I need you to know something." His voice was low, urgent, meant only for her ears. "This investigation, it's not what you think it is." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been working with the FBI for 8 months. I mean, the humiliation tonight, the public confrontation, the financial accusations, it was all designed to force this moment." Victoria stared at her husband, feeling her understanding of the evening's events shift once again. "You're saying you planned this?" "I'm saying I've been trying to protect you from something you didn't know you were involved in. And Victoria, the only way to save you, to save our family, was to make sure this confrontation happened in public where there would be witnesses to everything we said." The complexity of what Marcus was suggesting made Victoria's head spin. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that 3 months ago, I discovered that someone has been using your foundation to launder money without your knowledge. I'm talking about the fact that I've been working with federal agents to expose a criminal network that's been exploiting your generosity and threatening our family. Agent Chun was approaching them, clearly intending to end their private conversation. Victoria had seconds to decide whether to trust the husband who'd just humiliated her father or believe that everything she thought she understood was once again completely wrong. Victoria, Marcus said desperately, the scholarship recipients who were arrested, they weren't criminals before they received your money. They were turned into criminals by people who used your foundation as a recruiting ground. And when I tried to investigate, when I tried to protect you, those same people threatened Rebecca. The words hit Victoria like lightning. They threatened our daughter? They said if I didn't stop asking questions, if I didn't stop working with federal investigators, they'd make sure Rebecca faced criminal charges for activities she knows nothing about. Victoria felt the pieces of an impossible puzzle clicking into place. So you let me think you were betraying me to protect her from people I've been unknowingly helping. I let you think I was the villain because the alternative was letting you walk into federal custody without understanding that you're a victim, not a perpetrator. Agent Chin reached them before Victoria could respond. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, we really need to leave now. As Victoria walked toward the ballroom exit between federal agents, she realized that everything she'd thought she understood about the evening was wrong. Her triumph over Marcus, her moment of strength and independence, her revelation about the foundation, all of it had been part of a larger strategy she hadn't recognized. But looking back at Rebecca, standing beside Harold with tears streaming down her face, Victoria realized that the most important truth remained unchanged. She would do anything to protect her daughter, even if it meant trusting the man who just destroyed her reputation to save her life. Even if it meant walking into a federal investigation that could destroy everything she'd built. Even if it meant accepting that love sometimes looked like betrayal, and protection sometimes required sacrifice that the people you were protecting would never understand. The question now wasn't whether Marcus had been lying to her for months. It was whether his lies had been acts of love or acts of manipulation designed to control her when she finally learned the truth. And as Victoria Sterling left her daughter's wedding in federal custody, she realized that her marriage, her freedom, and her family's future all depended on learning the difference. The ballroom doors closed behind them, leaving Rebecca's wedding reception in ruins and Victoria's carefully constructed life in pieces. But somewhere in the chaos, a new understanding was beginning to form, one that would either save her family or destroy it completely. The choice was no longer hers to make. The FBI field office felt like a tomb at midnight. Victoria sat across from Agent Chun in a sterile interrogation room, her daughter's wedding dress replaced by federal custody attire, her understanding of reality fragmenting with each revelation. Mrs. Sterling, Agent Chun said, sliding a thick folder across the metal table. These are financial records from your foundation spanning the past 3 years. I need you to explain some irregularities. Victoria opened the folder and felt her blood turn to ice. The documents showed transactions she'd never authorized, recipient organizations she'd never heard of, fund transfers that violated every protocol she'd established for the foundation. I didn't approve any of these, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Agent Chun, someone has been accessing my foundation's accounts without authorization. That's what your husband claimed when we first contacted him 8 months ago. Victoria looked up sharply. 8 months ago? Mr. Sterling approached the bureau last spring with concerns about unusual activity in your joint financial accounts. He suspected that your foundation was being used for money laundering, and he was right. Agent Chin pulled out another document. Mrs. Sterling, did you know that your foundation's administrative coordinator, Jennifer Walsh, has been embezzling funds and redirecting them to criminal organizations? The name hit Victoria like lightning. Jennifer, the woman she'd trusted with day-to-day operations for 3 years. The woman who'd helped her coordinate scholarships and community projects. The woman Victoria had considered almost like a daughter. That's impossible. Jennifer's been with me since the beginning. She's completely trustworthy. Jennifer Walsh has been feeding information about your scholarship recipients to drug trafficking organizations. They've been using your foundation as a recruitment tool, targeting vulnerable young people and turning them into criminals. Victoria felt sick as she remembered the 3 scholarship recipients Marcus had mentioned. Young people she'd tried to help who'd been arrested for drug trafficking. You're saying I helped create criminals? We're saying you were manipulated by criminals who exploited your generosity. Mrs. Sterling, Jennifer Walsh has been working for people who saw your foundation as the perfect cover for illegal activities. Agent Chen leaned forward, his expression intense. But here's what we can't figure out. Your husband claims he's been investigating this situation for months, working with us to gather evidence. But our financial analysis suggests he's been moving money between accounts in ways that look deliberately designed to hide assets. Victoria felt the interrogation room's walls pressing closer. What are you saying? I'm saying that either your husband has been protecting you from criminal activity you didn't know about, or he's been orchestrating that criminal activity while positioning himself as the concerned spouse trying to save you. The possibility hit Victoria like a physical blow. After everything Marcus had told her, after his claims about protecting Rebecca, after her growing belief that his betrayal had actually been loyalty. What if it was all manipulation designed to control the narrative when the investigation became public? Agent Chen, I need to see my husband. That's not possible right now. Mr. Sterling is being interviewed by another team, and we need to complete your statement before any consultation between suspects. Suspects? Victoria's voice cracked. I thought you said I was a victim. Mrs. Sterling, at this point, we're not sure what you are. The evidence suggests either sophisticated victimization or sophisticated deception. Your cooperation in the next few hours will help us determine which. Agent Chen opened another folder, revealing surveillance photos that made Victoria's stomach clench. Images of her meeting with scholarship recipients, talking to Jennifer Walsh, visiting construction sites where Harold's company was working. Mrs. Sterling, in these photos, you appear to be coordinating activities with people we now know were involved in criminal enterprises. We need you to explain each interaction. Victoria studied the photos, seeing her own face transformed into evidence of potential criminal activity. Every act of kindness, every moment of charitable engagement, every proud visit to see her foundation's work, all of it recontextualized as possible conspiracy. I was doing my job, Victoria said desperately. I was overseeing the foundation's work, meeting with recipients, ensuring that projects were completed properly. Mrs. Sterling, did you know that the construction projects your father's company completed for your foundation were being used as fronts for drug storage and distribution? The accusation hit Victoria like lightning. That's impossible. My father runs a completely legitimate business. We're not suggesting your father knew about the illegal activities. But Mrs. Sterling, the buildings he constructed according to your foundation's specifications, they included hidden storage areas and modified electrical systems that are consistent with drug trafficking operations. Victoria felt her understanding of everything collapse. If Harold's construction work had been compromised, if the buildings she'd proudly visited contained criminal infrastructure, if her own foundation had been funding facilities for drug trafficking. Agent Chen, are you saying my father's work has been used for criminal purposes? We're saying that someone with detailed knowledge of your foundation's operations, your father's construction capabilities, and your family's financial resources has been orchestrating a sophisticated criminal enterprise using your legitimate activities as cover. Agent Chen paused, studying Victoria's expression. The question is whether that someone was your administrative coordinator working alone, your husband working with criminal partners, or you working with both of them. I would never. Mrs. Sterling, you've just admitted to running a multi-million-dollar foundation using undisclosed financial resources while your husband claimed tax deductions for charitable work you funded independently. That alone constitutes multiple federal crimes. The legal reality hit Victoria like a weight. Even if she was innocent of money laundering and drug trafficking, even if she'd been manipulated by criminals she'd never suspected, her foundation's financial structure had violated federal laws in ways that could send her to prison. I want a lawyer, Victoria said quietly. That's your right. But Mrs. Sterling, before you make that call, you should know that your husband has been providing testimony for the past 4 hours. Testimony that either exonerates you completely or implicates you in criminal conspiracy. Victoria felt trapped between impossible choices. Trust Marcus and hope that his testimony was protecting her, or demand legal representation and risk appearing uncooperative with an investigation that could save or destroy her family. What kind of testimony? Agent Chen hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Mr. Sterling claims that 3 months ago, he discovered evidence that Jennifer Walsh was working with criminal organizations to exploit your foundation. He says he contacted us immediately and has been working undercover to gather evidence while protecting you from retaliation. And you believe him? We believe the evidence he's provided. Financial records, recorded conversations, surveillance footage that corroborates his story. Mrs. Sterling, if your husband is telling the truth, then you're a victim of elaborate criminal manipulation. Victoria felt hope surge in her chest. But the financial analysis also shows that someone with intimate knowledge of your foundation's operations has been facilitating criminal activities for over 2 years. Someone who understood your charitable goals, your family relationships, your business connections. Agent Chun leaned back, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Sterling, either your husband has been protecting you from criminal activity you didn't know about, or he's been orchestrating that criminal activity while building a defense that makes you look like an unwitting accomplice. The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. Victoria realized that everything depended on Marcus's motivations. Whether his secrecy had been protection or manipulation, whether his investigation had been genuine or performative. Agent Chun, I need to ask you something directly. Do you believe my husband is telling the truth? Mrs. Sterling, I believe your husband is an extremely intelligent man who's been in a position to either prevent criminal activity or enable it. The evidence he's provided either demonstrates months of heroic undercover work or months of sophisticated criminal planning. Agent Chen opened one final folder. These are transcripts of recorded conversations between your husband and Jennifer Walsh. Conversations that either show him trying to expose her criminal activities or show him coordinating those activities while creating plausible deniability. Victoria read the transcripts with growing confusion. The conversations could be interpreted either way. Marcus could have been gathering evidence or giving instructions, confronting Jennifer or collaborating with her. Mrs. Sterling, your husband's testimony will determine whether you face criminal charges or receive victim status in this investigation. But here's what we can't determine from the evidence alone: whether you can trust the man whose testimony holds your future in his hands. Agent Chin stood up, moving toward the door. I'm going to give you 30 minutes to consider your options. You can continue cooperating without legal representation, hoping that your husband's testimony protects you. You can demand a lawyer and hope that independent legal advice helps you navigate this situation. Or, he paused at the door, his expression shifting to something that looked almost like sympathy. Or you can ask to speak directly with your husband. One conversation, monitored and recorded, where you can decide for yourself whether the man you've been married to for 23 years has been trying to save you or destroy you. The offer hung in the air like a lifeline and a trap simultaneously. Victoria realized that the next choice she made would determine not just her legal future, but her understanding of her entire marriage. Agent Chin, Victoria said quietly, if I speak with Marcus, if I learn that he's been lying to me about protecting our family, what happens then? Then you'll have to decide whether to trust the federal agents investigating your case or trust the husband who may have been manipulating you for months. Agent Chin opened the door, revealing the hallway that led either to freedom or deeper into a nightmare Victoria was still trying to understand. Mrs. Sterling, 23 years of marriage comes down to one question. Do you believe Marcus Sterling loves you enough to destroy his own reputation to save yours? Or do you believe he's smart enough to manipulate federal investigators while positioning you to take responsibility for his crimes? As the door closed behind Agent Chin, Victoria sat alone in the interrogation room, surrounded by evidence that could either exonerate or condemn her, facing a choice that would determine whether her marriage had been built on love or lies. The question wasn't whether she could trust Marcus. The question was whether she could trust her own judgment about the man she'd shared a life with for over 2 decades. And somewhere in another interrogation room, Marcus Sterling was making choices that would either save his wife or sacrifice her for crimes she'd never imagined she was connected to. The truth was 30 minutes away. But Victoria was beginning to suspect that the truth might be more devastating than any lie she'd been living. The moment Victoria saw Marcus through the one-way glass, she knew something fundamental had changed in his expression. Gone was the confident businessman who'd humiliated her father. Gone was the concerned husband who'd claimed to be protecting their family. The man sitting in the interrogation room looked like someone who'd been caught in a lie so complex he could no longer remember which version of the truth he was supposed to be telling. Mrs. Sterling, Agent Chin said, opening the door between the observation room and where Marcus waited. You have 15 minutes. Victoria entered the room feeling like she was walking into her own execution. Marcus looked up as she sat down, and for a moment, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like relief. Victoria, he said softly, Are you all right? The tenderness in his voice was so genuine, so much like the man she'd fallen in love with 23 years ago, that Victoria felt tears threaten. But she also remembered Agent Chen's warning about manipulation, about the possibility that everything Marcus had told her was calculated deception. I don't know what I am anymore, Victoria replied. Marcus, I need you to tell me the truth. All of it. No more protection, no more strategy, no more lies designed to save me from information you think I can't handle. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Victoria, if I tell you everything, if I tell you the complete truth about what's been happening, it's going to destroy more than just our marriage. More than our marriage is already destroyed, Marcus. I'm facing federal criminal charges. Our daughter's wedding was destroyed. My father was humiliated in front of everyone we know. What exactly are you still trying to protect me from? Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I'm trying to protect you from the knowledge that Rebecca is in immediate danger, and that everything I've done, including working with the FBI, has been designed to keep our daughter alive. The words hit Victoria like ice water. What do you mean Rebecca is in immediate danger? I mean that 3 weeks ago, Jennifer Walsh told me that if I didn't stop cooperating with federal investigators, if I didn't find a way to discredit the FBI's investigation, they would kill Rebecca and make it look like a car accident. Victoria felt the world tilt sideways. They threatened our daughter? They threatened our daughter because the criminal organization using your foundation isn't just about money laundering, Victoria. It's about human trafficking. The scholarship recipients who were arrested, they weren't just being used as drug runners. They were being groomed for something much worse. The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. Human trafficking. Young people she'd tried to help, students she'd personally selected for scholarships, being manipulated into criminal activity that could destroy their lives completely. Marcus, why didn't you tell me this immediately? Marcus's expression shifted to something that looked like shame mixed with desperation. Because Jennifer Walsh proved to me that they had people watching Rebecca constantly. Because she showed me surveillance photos of our daughter that made it clear they could hurt her at any time. Victoria felt sick with the implications. So you've been working with criminals to protect Rebecca while pretending to work with the FBI to protect me? I've been working with both, trying to play them against each other while keeping you and Rebecca safe from retaliation. But something in Marcus's tone didn't match the desperation of what he was telling her. Victoria studied his face, seeing calculation underneath the concern, seeing the same expression he wore during difficult business negotiations. Marcus, she said slowly, how long have you known Jennifer Walsh? The question seemed to catch Marcus off guard. What do you mean? I mean, Jennifer came to work for my foundation 3 years ago with impeccable references and detailed knowledge of charitable work. References that I now realize I never personally verified. Victoria watched Marcus's expression carefully, seeing micro-expressions that she'd learned to read over 23 years of marriage. Marcus, did you recommend Jennifer for the position with my foundation? The silence that followed was answer enough. Victoria felt 23 years of trust crumbling as she realized the scope of what Marcus was revealing. You planted Jennifer Walsh in my foundation 3 years ago, Victoria said, her voice deadly quiet. Victoria, it's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Tell me why my husband recommended someone to manage my charitable work without telling me about their connection. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating how much truth he could reveal without destroying himself completely. Jennifer is my business partner's daughter, he said finally. William Foster's daughter. She needed a job, and your foundation needed administrative help. And you didn't think I should know about this family connection? I thought it would create a conflict of interest if you knew she was connected to my business relationships. Victoria stared at her husband, seeing lies layered on top of lies, seeing manipulation disguised as protection. Marcus, Jennifer Walsh has been embezzling from my foundation and using it for criminal activities. Are you telling me this is all a coincidence? I'm telling you that when I discovered what Jennifer was doing, when I realized how she was exploiting your generosity, I contacted the FBI immediately. When exactly did you discover what Jennifer was doing? Marcus hesitated. 6 months ago. 6 months ago. Victoria felt something cold and final settling in her chest. Marcus, Agent Chen told me you contacted the FBI 8 months ago. Which timeline is accurate? The discrepancy hung between them like an accusation. Victoria watched Marcus realize that his story wasn't consistent, that he'd been caught in a lie that revealed more than he'd intended. Victoria, the timeline isn't important. The timeline is everything. Victoria's voice was rising now, drawing the attention of agents monitoring their conversation. Marcus, either you discovered criminal activity and immediately reported it, or you knew about criminal activity for months before deciding to protect yourself by cooperating with federal investigators. Marcus was quiet, and in that silence, Victoria heard her answer. You knew, she whispered. You've known about the money laundering, about the criminal activity, about the threats to scholarship recipients. You've known all of it, and you've been participating. Victoria, I was trying to protect our family. You were trying to protect yourself. Victoria stood up, pacing the small room like a caged animal. Marcus, you've been using my foundation for criminal activities while positioning yourself as the concerned husband trying to save his naive wife from her own charitable impulses. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Marcus looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Victoria, please listen to me. Yes, I knew about some irregularities. Yes, I should have told you sooner. But everything I've done has been to protect you and Rebecca from people who would kill you both to protect their operation. What operation, Marcus? What exactly have you been participating in? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing whether complete honesty would save him or destroy him. Money laundering for human trafficking organizations, he said finally. Victoria, your foundation has been used to clean money that funds some of the most horrific crimes imaginable. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Everything she'd built, every life she'd tried to improve, every act of generosity she'd been proud of, all of it corrupted by criminal activity that destroyed the very people she'd been trying to help. And you participated in this? I discovered it and tried to find a way to stop it without getting our family killed. By cooperating with the criminals while pretending to cooperate with the FBI? Marcus's silence was answer enough. Victoria felt the last pillar of her marriage collapse as she realized that Marcus hadn't been protecting her from criminal activity. He'd been protecting criminal activity from her discovery while positioning himself to escape prosecution when the investigation became public. Marcus, she said quietly, who else knows? About your participation, about the money laundering, about the threats to Rebecca? Marcus looked up at her with an expression that combined guilt, desperation, and something that looked almost like love. Your father knows, he said quietly. The words hit Victoria like lightning. What? Harold figured it out 6 weeks ago. The construction projects, the modified buildings, the unusual specifications for electrical and storage systems. He realized that someone was using his work for criminal purposes. Victoria felt her understanding of everything shift once again. And he confronted me. Harold threatened to expose everything unless I found a way to protect you from criminal prosecution. The revelation recontextualized her father's behavior over the past months. His careful questions about her foundation, his protective instincts at the wedding, his immediate support when Marcus attacked him publicly. My father has been trying to protect me from you, Victoria said slowly. Your father has been trying to protect you from a situation that could destroy our entire family. Victoria realized that Harold's quiet dignity, his acceptance of Marcus's humiliation, his willingness to be publicly embarrassed, all of it had been designed to protect her from learning truths that could have gotten her killed. Marcus, why are you telling me this now? Marcus looked directly at her, and for the first time in months, Victoria saw complete honesty in his expression. Because Harold Chun was found dead in his hotel room 2 hours ago. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She felt her legs give out, felt herself collapsing into the chair as the magnitude of what Marcus was telling her sank in. What? Hotel security found him an hour after we left for the FBI offices. Victoria, they killed your father because he knew too much about their operation. Victoria felt her world collapsing completely. Harold, her protector, her moral compass, the man who'd taught her everything about integrity and strength, was dead because he'd tried to save her from her husband's criminal activities. And Rebecca? Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked at her with an expression that combined grief, guilt, and terror. Rebecca is missing, he said quietly. Hotel security can't locate her anywhere in the building. Victoria, I think they took our daughter. The revelation hit Victoria like the end of the world. Her father was dead. Her daughter was missing. Her marriage was built on criminal activity that funded human trafficking. And the man she'd loved for 23 years had been manipulating her while participating in crimes that destroyed innocent lives. Victoria sat in the FBI interrogation room, surrounded by evidence of her own manipulation, facing the possibility that everyone she loved was either dead, missing, or criminally complicit in activities that violated everything she'd tried to build her life around. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I need you to tell me one more thing, and I need you to be completely honest." "Anything." Victoria looked at her husband, the father of her child, the man she'd built a life with, the person who'd just revealed that their entire relationship had been constructed around lies designed to exploit her charitable work for criminal profit. "Do you love me? Have you ever actually loved me? Or has this entire marriage been about positioning yourself to use my resources while protecting yourself from prosecution?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, Victoria found her answer. Because real love didn't require 23 years of lies. Real love didn't use charitable work to fund human trafficking. And real love didn't get your father killed and your daughter kidnapped while positioning itself as protection. Victoria Sterling sat alone in a federal interrogation room, betrayed by her husband, mourning her father, terrified for her daughter, and facing criminal charges for activities she'd never known she was enabling. The woman who'd stood up to Marcus at her daughter's wedding no longer existed. In her place sat someone who'd learned that love could be the most sophisticated form of manipulation, that protection could be the most devastating form of betrayal, and that sometimes the people who destroyed your life convinced you they were saving it until the very moment you discovered the truth. The question now wasn't whether she could save her marriage. It was whether she could save her daughter before the criminal organization that had killed her father decided that Victoria Sterling knew too much to be allowed to live. Victoria sat in the FBI conference room, staring at crime scene photos of her father's hotel room while Agent Chun explained how Harold had been murdered. The clinical details, suffocation made to look like a heart attack, no signs of struggle, professional execution, felt surreal against the backdrop of her daughter's wedding flowers still scattered on the table. "Mrs. Sterling," Agent Chun said gently, "we need to discuss your options for helping us locate Rebecca." Victoria looked up from the photos, her eyes hollow with grief and shock. "What options? You just told me that a criminal organization killed my father and kidnapped my daughter. What exactly do you think I can do that federal agents can't?" "You can make contact with the people holding her," Agent Chun replied. "Mrs. Sterling, they want something from you. Something specific that only you can provide." Marcus, who'd been silent since revealing the truth about Harold's death, finally spoke. "Victoria, they want the Foundation's complete financial records. Real records, not the sanitized versions I've been providing to investigators." Victoria stared at her husband, seeing him clearly for the first time in decades. "Why?" "Because your foundation has been used to launder money for multiple criminal organizations. The real records would expose clients, operations, and financial networks that span 12 countries." Agent Chun leaned forward. "Mrs. Sterling, those records could dismantle one of the largest human trafficking networks in North America. But providing them to criminals would also ensure that hundreds of ongoing victims remain enslaved, and that the people responsible never face justice." The choice was clear and devastating. Save her daughter by protecting criminals, or protect unknown victims by potentially sacrificing Rebecca. "There's more," Marcus said quietly. "Victoria, the people holding Rebecca, they're not just using her as leverage against you. They're planning to sell her." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "Human trafficking, Victoria. Our daughter is young, educated, from a wealthy family. She's exactly the type of victim that brings premium prices in international markets." Victoria felt bow rise in her throat. "How long?" Agent Chun consulted his notes. "Based on similar cases, we estimate you have perhaps 18 hours before they move her to a location where recovery becomes nearly impossible." 18 hours. Victoria looked around the conference room, seeing agents and prosecutors and evidence files, seeing the machinery of justice that was supposed to protect people like her daughter. But none of it seemed capable of moving fast enough to save Rebecca. "Agent Chun," Victoria said, "what happens if I give them what they want? If I provide the real financial records? Then hundreds of trafficking victims remain enslaved. Dozens of criminal operations continue destroying lives, and Rebecca becomes a witness who represents an ongoing threat to their security. Meaning they'll kill her anyway. Meaning they'll kill her after they've used her to ensure your continued silence." Victoria felt trapped between impossible choices, each path leading to Rebecca's death or the destruction of innocent people. Mrs. Sterling, Agent Chin continued, there is one other option. What? You could agree to meet with them, to provide the records personally. We could wire you, track the location, attempt a rescue operation. Marcus was shaking his head before Agent Chin finished speaking. Victoria, that's suicide. These people have killed federal witnesses, local law enforcement, anyone who threatens their operation. They'll kill you the moment they have what they want. But they might not kill Rebecca immediately if I'm there, Victoria said, grasping for any possibility that offered hope. Or they'll kill you both and disappear with information that allows them to continue destroying lives for decades, Marcus replied. Victoria realized that Marcus, despite his betrayals, despite his participation in criminal activity, was right about the tactical realities. Meeting with Rebecca's captors offered almost no chance of survival for either of them. Agent Chin, Victoria said quietly, what would you do if it was your daughter? Agent Chin was quiet for a long moment. Mrs. Sterling, I'd probably make the same choice you're considering. But I'd also know that it was an emotional decision, not a strategic one. Victoria's phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. Asterisk, you have 12 hours to decide. Complete financial records for your daughter's life. Refuse, and you'll receive pieces of her until you change your mind. Asterisk. The threat was accompanied by a photo that made Victoria's stomach clench with terror. Rebecca, clearly terrified, bound and gagged in what looked like a warehouse or basement. They're not negotiating, Victoria whispered, showing the message to Agent Chin. They're not interested in deals or prisoner exchanges. They want complete capitulation. Mrs. Sterling, we can trace that message, analyze the photo for location clues. In 12 hours? Victoria's voice was rising with desperation. Agent Chin, they're going to start mutilating my daughter if I don't give them information that would protect criminals who destroy lives for profit. She stood up, pacing the conference room like a caged animal. You want to know what the worst part is? I built that foundation to help people. Every dollar I invested, every project I funded, every scholarship I provided, it was all supposed to make the world better. Victoria looked at Marcus, seeing guilt and calculation warring in his expression. And my own husband corrupted it. My own husband let criminals use my charitable work to fund human trafficking while convincing me that I was saving lives. Victoria, I never intended. You never intended to get caught. Victoria's voice was raw with fury and grief. Marcus, you participated in activities that destroyed the exact lives I was trying to save. You let them use my foundation to recruit vulnerable young people, to exploit their trust, to turn them into victims. The weight of what she was saying hit the room like a bomb. Victoria realized that her charitable work hadn't just been corrupted. It had been turned into the opposite of everything she'd believed she was building. Mrs. Sterling, Agent Chin said gently, you didn't know. You were manipulated by people who specialized in exploiting good intentions. Doesn't matter, Victoria replied. Those young people, the scholarship recipients who were arrested, the kids who were recruited through my foundation, they trusted me. They believed I was helping them build better lives. Victoria felt the full weight of unintended consequences crushing down on her. And instead, I funded the very system that destroyed them. Her phone buzzed again. Asterisk 11 hours, 53 minutes. Each hour you delay, she loses something permanent. Start with fingers, move to more essential parts. Asterisk. Victoria felt her knees give out, collapsing into a chair as the reality of Rebecca's situation became undeniable. They're going to torture her to death while I decide between saving her and protecting people I've never met. Victoria, Marcus said desperately, there has to be another way. Some solution that saves Rebecca without protecting criminals. Agent Chun was typing rapidly on his laptop. Mrs. Sterling, we're analyzing the photo metadata, coordinating with local law enforcement, mobilizing rescue teams. But honestly, 12 hours isn't enough time for a conventional investigation. Then what are my real options? Agent Chen looked at her with an expression that combined professional honesty with personal sympathy. Your real options are to provide the financial records and hope that criminal organizations honor agreements they've never honored before, or to refuse and watch your daughter die while protecting people you've never met. Victoria felt the impossible mathematics of the situation crushing her spirit. Save Rebecca and enable continued trafficking of hundreds of other people's daughters. Protect unknown victims and sacrifice her own child. There's one more thing, Marcus said quietly. Victoria, the financial records they want, I've been falsifying them for months. The real records, the ones that would actually expose criminal operations, they're not in the Foundation's official files. Victoria stared at her husband, hope and suspicion warring in her chest. What are you saying? I'm saying the records in your Foundation system have been sanitized to protect my business relationships. The real information, the evidence that could actually destroy trafficking networks, I've been keeping separate. Agent Chen leaned forward intently. Mr. Sterling, are you saying you have access to evidence that could expose the entire criminal operation? I'm saying I have evidence that could send dozens of people to prison for life and free hundreds of trafficking victims. But Victoria, using that evidence would mean admitting my own criminal participation in ways that would guarantee life imprisonment. Victoria felt a spark of understanding. Marcus, you're talking about a confession. You're talking about trading your freedom for Rebecca's life and the victim's rescue. I'm talking about the only choice that saves Rebecca without protecting criminals. But Victoria, it means I'll spend the rest of my life in federal prison. The proposal hung in the air like a lifeline and a death sentence simultaneously. Victoria realized that Marcus was offering to sacrifice himself to save their daughter and atone for his criminal participation. But looking at his expression, she also realized that even this gesture might be manipulation. Another calculated move designed to position himself as the repentant husband making the ultimate sacrifice. Agent Chen, Victoria said quietly, if Marcus provides complete evidence and testimony, if he confesses to everything he's participated in, what are the chances of saving Rebecca? Significantly higher. But Mrs. Sterling, it would also mean trusting the same man who's been lying to you for years to provide honest testimony about criminal activities you've never fully understood. Victoria felt the weight of 23 years of marriage, of trust broken and rebuilt and broken again, settling on her shoulders. The choice wasn't just between Rebecca's life and strangers' safety. It was about whether to trust Marcus one more time when the stakes were literally life and death. Victoria, Marcus said softly, I know you have no reason to trust me. I know I've destroyed your faith in me completely. But if there's any chance that my confession could save Rebecca and help those trafficking victims, isn't it worth the risk? Victoria looked at her husband, the father of her child, the man who'd corrupted her life's work, the person whose lies had gotten her father killed and her daughter kidnapped. Marcus, she said quietly, if I trust you one more time, if I let you make this deal with federal agents, and if you're still lying to me, Rebecca dies and trafficking victims remain enslaved. Yes. And if you're telling the truth, you spend the rest of your life in prison while I live with the knowledge that I was married to a criminal for 23 years. Yes. Victoria felt the walls of her world closing in completely. Every choice led to devastating loss. Every path forward required trusting someone who'd already betrayed her, or sacrificing someone she loved more than life itself. Her phone buzzed. Asterisk 11 hours 37 minutes. Decision time approaches. Remember that some losses are permanent. Asterisk. Victoria Sterling sat in an FBI conference room, faced with choices that would either save her daughter or sacrifice her, either trust her criminal husband or watch him destroy more lives, either preserve her own integrity or compromise it to save someone she loved. The woman who'd stood up to Marcus at Rebecca's wedding felt like a memory from another lifetime. In her place sat someone who'd learned that love could destroy everything you believed in, that good intentions could fund the worst crimes imaginable, and that sometimes the only way to save the people you loved was to trust the people who'd betrayed them. The question now wasn't whether she could make the right choice. It was whether any choice she made could possibly be right when every option led to devastating loss and unbearable consequences. Outside the conference room windows, Victoria could see the sun setting over a city where her daughter was being held by criminals who'd used Victoria's foundation to destroy other families' children. Time was running out, and Victoria Sterling was about to discover whether love meant trusting the untrustworthy or sacrificing everything to maintain principles that might not be strong enough to save the people who mattered most. Victoria stared at her phone, watching the countdown to Rebecca's torture tick away minute by minute, when something in Marcus's expression caught her attention. He was studying Agent Chen with an intensity that seemed wrong for someone focused on saving their daughter. Marcus, Victoria said quietly, what aren't you telling me? Victoria, I don't know what you mean. You keep looking at Agent Chen like you're waiting for something, like you're expecting him to say or do something specific. Agent Chen glanced up from his laptop, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Sterling, I think you're misreading the situation. Your husband is understandably anxious about the time pressure. But Victoria had spent 23 years reading Marcus's micro-expressions during business negotiations. She knew when he was calculating, when he was waiting for someone else to make a move, when he was working an angle that others couldn't see. Agent Chen, Victoria said slowly, how long have you known Marcus? The question seemed to catch both men off guard. Agent Chen's fingers stilled on his keyboard, and Marcus's calculating expression flickered towards something that looked almost like panic. Mrs. Sterling, I met your husband when he contacted the Bureau 8 months ago. That's not what I asked. Victoria stood up, her grief and desperation crystallizing into something sharper and more dangerous. I asked how long you've known him. Not how long you've been working this case, but how long you've known Marcus Sterling personally. The silence that followed was answer enough. Victoria felt pieces of an impossible puzzle clicking into place with devastating clarity. You're not just investigating my husband, Victoria said, her voice growing stronger with each word. You're working with him. Agent Chen and Marcus exchanged a look that confirmed Victoria's worst suspicions. Mrs. Sterling, Agent Chen said carefully, you're under tremendous stress. I'm under tremendous stress because the two of you have been manipulating me while my daughter is being tortured by criminals you're supposed to be fighting. Victoria moved toward the conference room door, her hand hovering over the handle. Agent Chen, how long have you and Marcus been partners in whatever this really is? Victoria, please sit down, Marcus said urgently. You don't understand the complexity of the situation. I understand that my father is dead, my daughter is missing, and the two people who are supposed to be helping me keep having private conversations with their eyes instead of their voices. Victoria pulled out her phone, but not to check the countdown. Instead, she opened the voice recording app she'd been using to document foundation meetings for years. I've been recording this conversation for the past 20 minutes, she announced, watching both men go pale. Agent Chen, would you like to explain to whoever reviews this recording why an FBI agent investigating financial crimes has been coordinating with the primary suspect instead of interrogating him? The accusation hung in the air like an explosive device. Victoria could see both men calculating how much damage her recording could do to whatever operation they'd been running. Mrs. Sterling, Agent Chen said carefully, I need you to understand that some law enforcement operations require methods that might seem irregular to civilians. Like fake kidnappings designed to pressure victims into cooperating? The words left Victoria's mouth before she'd fully processed the thought, but the moment she said them, she knew she was right. The look of shock and terror on both men's faces confirmed what her instincts had been telling her for the past hour. Rebecca was never kidnapped, Victoria said, her voice gaining strength from fury and devastating clarity. This entire crisis, my father's death, the countdown, the torture threats, it's all been designed to pressure me into providing evidence or testimony you couldn't get through legal means. Marcus was standing now, his composed facade cracking completely. Victoria, Rebecca is in real danger. From who? From you. Victoria pulled up her daughter's contact information. Marcus, I'm going to call Rebecca right now. And if she answers, if she's safe and this has all been an elaborate manipulation, I'm going to ensure that both of you face charges for psychological torture and conspiracy. Don't, Agent Chen said sharply, his professional mask slipping to reveal something cold and desperate underneath. Mrs. Sterling, making that call could get your daughter killed. By who? By the criminals you're supposedly investigating, or by the law enforcement officers who've been manipulating me. Victoria hit the call button before either man could stop her. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and Victoria felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she waited to learn whether her daughter was in mortal danger or whether she'd been psychologically tortured by people she'd trusted. Mom. Rebecca's voice came through the phone, confused but clearly safe. Mom, what's wrong? You sound terrible. Victoria felt her knees give out as relief and rage crashed over her simultaneously. Rebecca was alive, safe, unharmed, which meant everything Victoria had been told about kidnapping and torture had been lies designed to break her psychologically. Rebecca, sweetheart, where are you right now? I'm at the hotel, Mom. In the bridal suite with James. We were worried about you after the FBI agents took you and Dad away. Are you okay? Victoria looked at Marcus and Agent Chen, seeing fear and calculation in their expressions as they realized their manipulation had been exposed. Rebecca, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Go to the hotel lobby immediately. Find hotel security and tell them you need protection from federal agents who may not be legitimate. Don't trust anyone who claims to be helping our family unless you can verify their identity through independent sources. Mom, you're scaring me. What's happening? What's happening is that your mother has been lied to by people who wanted to use her emotional vulnerability to extract information or cooperation they couldn't get legally. Victoria hung up and turned to face Marcus and Agent Chun with an expression that made both men step backward. So, she said, her voice deadly calm, which one of you wants to explain how an FBI investigation turned into psychological warfare against a victim you were supposedly protecting? Agent Chun was reaching for his radio, but Victoria's voice stopped him cold. If you call for backup, if you try to escalate this situation, if you do anything except provide complete and honest answers to my questions, I'm going to call every media contact I've built over 23 years of charity work and tell them that federal agents have been torturing a crime victim to extract evidence. The threat was real and immediate. Victoria could see both men recognizing that she had the resources and credibility to destroy their careers and their operation if they continued lying to her. Mrs. Sterling, Agent Chin said carefully, you're misunderstanding the situation. I'm understanding the situation perfectly. You and Marcus have been working together to manipulate me into providing evidence or testimony that would benefit whatever operation you're really running. My father's death was real, but everything else, the kidnapping, the countdown, the torture threats, has been theater designed to break me psychologically. Victoria felt strength flowing through her that she hadn't experienced in decades. Not the managed competence she'd used to handle social crises, but the fierce clarity that came from finally seeing truth after months of manipulation. Marcus, she said, turning to her husband, I want you to understand something very clearly. 23 years of marriage just ended. Not because you participated in criminal activity, not because you corrupted my foundation, but because you used our daughter's supposed kidnapping to torture me into compliance. Marcus looked like a man watching his world collapse in real time. Victoria, we were trying to protect you. You were trying to control me. There's a difference. Victoria pulled out her phone again, this time calling a number that made both men go pale with genuine terror. Senator Mitchell? This is Victoria Sterling. I need to report federal agents who've been conducting unauthorized psychological operations against American citizens. The call connected immediately, and Victoria realized that her years of charitable work, her reputation in the community, her connections to people with real power, all of it gave her resources that Marcus and Agent Chen had underestimated. Victoria Sterling, came the warm voice of the senior senator from their state. What can I do for you? Senator, I'm being held by federal agents who've been using fake kidnapping scenarios and psychological torture to extract information from crime victims. I need immediate intervention from legitimate federal oversight. Victoria could see panic in both men's faces as they realized she was escalating this beyond their control. Victoria, are you in immediate danger? I'm in the FBI field office, but I don't believe the agents I'm dealing with are conducting legitimate law enforcement activities. Senator, I need independent verification of their credentials and oversight of their methods. I'll have Senate investigators there within the hour. Victoria, are you safe to wait, or do you need immediate extraction? Victoria looked at Marcus and Agent Chin, seeing two men who'd underestimated her resources and overestimated their control over the situation. I'm safe, Senator. But I think you're going to find some very interesting irregularities in how this investigation has been conducted. As Victoria hung up, she felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of her own power. For 23 years, she'd been the perfect corporate wife, managing crises instead of solving them, smoothing over problems instead of exposing them. But the woman sitting in that FBI conference room was someone new. Someone forged by betrayal and tempered by the discovery that love sometimes meant refusing to be manipulated, even by people who claimed their lies were protection. Marcus, Victoria said quietly, you wanted to know what real foundations look like? They look like a woman who refuses to be broken by people who underestimate her intelligence, her resources, and her willingness to fight for the truth. She stood up, moving toward the door with the confidence of someone who'd finally learned the difference between being managed and being empowered. Agent Chin, when the Senate investigators arrive, you can explain to them how psychological torture became an acceptable law enforcement technique. As Victoria reached for the door handle, Marcus called out desperately, Victoria, If you expose this operation, if you bring in Senate oversight, you'll destroy years of work that could save trafficking victims." Victoria paused, her hand on the door handle, and turned back to face the two men who'd tried to break her spirit to serve their agenda. "Marcus," she said with the quiet certainty of someone who'd finally found her moral center, "if your operation requires torturing innocent people to save other innocent people, then your operation deserves to be destroyed." She opened the door, walking out of the FBI field office and into a future where she would never again mistake manipulation for protection, where she would never again allow someone else's agenda to compromise her integrity, and where she would use her own power to protect people instead of being used by others who claimed to be protecting her. The woman who'd been psychologically tortured was walking away. The woman who refused to be broken was walking toward justice. And Victoria Sterling was about to discover that real power came not from managing crises, but from refusing to accept situations that should never exist in the first place. Victoria was halfway across the FBI building's lobby when she heard gunshots from the conference room she'd just left. The sound echoed through the marble corridors like thunder, sending civilians diving for cover and security guards rushing toward the source. But instead of running away from danger like every instinct screamed at her to do, Victoria felt something cold and certain settle in her chest. She turned back toward the conference room, moving against the flow of people evacuating the building. Because 23 years of reading Marcus's expressions had taught her to recognize when he was calculating escape routes. And 10 minutes of conversation with Agent Chun had revealed micro-expressions that didn't match legitimate federal law enforcement training. Victoria reached the conference room as real FBI agents burst through the doors, weapons drawn, finding Marcus and the man who'd been impersonating Agent Chun both wounded but alive. Marcus was bleeding from his shoulder, while the fake agent was unconscious from what appeared to be a head injury. "Mrs. Sterling," a woman in a federal jacket called out, approaching Victoria with professional authority. "I'm Agent Sarah Martinez, actual FBI Financial Crimes Division. Are you injured?" Victoria looked at Agent Martinez, seeing genuine federal credentials and the kind of competent authority that the fake Agent Chun had been mimicking poorly. "I'm not injured, but I think I've been the victim of an elaborate criminal conspiracy disguised as a federal investigation." Agent Martinez was already coordinating with other agents, speaking rapidly into her radio. "Mrs. Sterling, we've been tracking this situation for hours. When Senator Mitchell contacted our director about irregularities in your case, we discovered that David Chun was never an FBI agent." "Then who is he?" "David Chun is a professional con artist who specializes in impersonating federal agents to extract information from victims." "Mrs. Sterling, you've been the target of a sophisticated criminal operation." Victoria felt pieces clicking into place with devastating and liberating clarity. The entire investigation was fake? Not entirely. There really are irregularities in your foundation's finances. There really is criminal activity that needs to be investigated. But the people who've been investigating, you have been criminals themselves. Agent Martinez gestured toward Marcus, who was being treated by paramedics while remaining handcuffed. "Mrs. Sterling, your husband shot Mr. Chun when he realized you'd exposed their operation and called for legitimate federal oversight." Victoria stared at Marcus, seeing something in his expression that she'd never seen before. Not calculation or manipulation, but what looked like genuine relief mixed with exhaustion. "Agent Martinez," Victoria said slowly, "what exactly has my husband been involved in?" "That's what we're still determining. But Mrs. Sterling, the initial evidence suggests that Mr. Sterling has been trying to expose criminal activity, not participate in it." The revelation hit Victoria like lightning. "What do you mean?" Agent Martinez pulled out a tablet, showing Victoria financial records that looked familiar but subtly different from what she'd seen earlier. "Mrs. Sterling, these are the real financial records from your foundation. Records that show no evidence of money laundering or criminal activity." Victoria studied the documents, seeing her foundations work exactly as she'd intended it. Scholarships for deserving students, construction projects for community benefit, charitable activities that help people instead of harming them. "I don't understand. The fake agent Chun showed me evidence of criminal activity. Fabricated evidence designed to make you believe your charitable work had been corrupted. Mrs. Sterling, your foundation has been completely legitimate. The criminal activity was the con operation targeting you, not the foundation itself." Victoria felt 23 years of assumptions crashing down around her. But Marcus admitted to participating in money laundering. Mr. Sterling has been providing false confessions to protect you from what he believed was a legitimate federal investigation. Mrs. Sterling, your husband thought he was taking responsibility for crimes you might be charged with. Agent Martinez paused, consulting her notes. Mrs. Sterling, we need to discuss your father. Victoria felt ice form in her stomach. Harold? They told me he was murdered. Harold Chin is alive and safe. He's been in protective custody since yesterday, after he contacted legitimate federal authorities about concerns regarding your safety. The words hit Victoria like an explosion of relief and rage. My father is alive? Your father suspected that someone was targeting your family and contacted us through proper channels. Mr. Sterling, when he discovered that fake federal agents were manipulating you, shot the impersonator to protect you from whatever they were planning. Victoria looked at Marcus, this man she'd been married to for 23 years, who'd just shot someone to protect her from criminals she'd been trusting as law enforcement. Agent Martinez, Victoria said quietly, how long has this been going on? The con operation targeting your family? Approximately 6 months. Mrs. Sterling, you were selected because your foundation's success made you an attractive target for financial fraud. But why the elaborate psychological manipulation? Why not just steal money directly? Agent Martinez was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Mrs. Sterling, the people targeting you weren't just after money. They wanted complete access to your foundation's operations, your donor networks, your community connections. For what purpose? To establish a legitimate charitable organization that could be used as a front for actual criminal activities. Mrs. Sterling, your reputation, your foundation's credibility, your community standing. Those were more valuable to criminals than any amount of money they could steal. The scope of what Victoria was learning made her head spin. They wanted to steal my entire life's work and turn it into a criminal enterprise. They wanted to turn you into an unwitting front for criminal activities while convincing you that you were cooperating with law enforcement to expose those same activities. Victoria realized that the fake investigation had been designed not just to extract information, but to compromise her psychologically and morally until she became complicit in criminal activity while believing she was fighting it. Agent Martinez, what about the scholarship recipients who were arrested? The young people Marcus said were being used for criminal activities. Mrs. Sterling, there were no arrests. The students your foundation helped are doing well in their educational programs. The criminal recruitment, the drug trafficking, the human trafficking, all of it was fabricated to make you believe your charitable work was causing harm. Victoria felt the last pieces of a devastating puzzle clicking into place. They were destroying my faith in my own work to make me vulnerable to their manipulation. Exactly. Mrs. Sterling, psychological manipulation of this sophistication requires extensive preparation and detailed knowledge of the target's values and vulnerabilities. Agent Martinez pulled out another document. Mrs. Sterling, we believe this operation was funded and coordinated by people who saw your foundation's growth and success as a threat to their own criminal activities. What kind of threat? The threat of legitimate charitable work exposing illegitimate operations. Mrs. Sterling, your foundation's community projects, your scholarship programs, your construction initiatives, they've been cleaning up neighborhoods and supporting young people in ways that make criminal recruitment more difficult. Victoria felt understanding dawn with beautiful and terrible clarity. They weren't trying to use my foundation for criminal activities. They were trying to destroy it because it was interfering with their criminal activities. Your foundation's success was making their work harder. So they decided to eliminate the threat by convincing you that your own charitable activities were criminal. Agent Martinez gestured toward Marcus, who was listening to their conversation while being treated by paramedics. Mrs. Sterling, your husband figured this out approximately 3 weeks ago. When he realized that the federal investigation was actually a criminal con operation, he started gathering evidence while pretending to cooperate. Victoria looked at Marcus with new understanding. The confession he offered, the willingness to go to prison, was an attempt to protect you from what he believed was a legitimate federal investigation. Mr. Sterling thought he was sacrificing himself to save you from criminal charges. But when I called Senator Mitchell, when I brought in real federal oversight, you exposed the fake operation and forced the criminals to reveal themselves. Mrs. Sterling, your refusal to be manipulated probably saved your life. Victoria felt transformation crystallizing in her bones. Not just understanding of the evening's events, but understanding of her own power, her own worth, her own capacity to protect herself and others. Agent Martinez, Victoria said, what happens now? Now we arrest the criminals who've been targeting your family, we protect the legitimate charitable work you've been doing, and we ensure that your foundation can continue operating without interference from people who see your success as a threat. Victoria pulled out her phone, scrolling to Rebecca's number. Agent Martinez, I need to call my daughter and explain that her parents aren't criminals, that her grandfather is alive, and that her wedding reception was disrupted by people trying to destroy our family's work. Mrs. Sterling, there's one more thing you should know. Victoria felt familiar dread settle in her stomach. What? Agent Martinez smiled. The first genuinely positive expression Victoria had seen from any federal agent all evening. Your foundation's work, the community projects, the scholarship programs. Our investigation found that it's been even more successful than you realized. What do you mean? We mean that your foundation's activities have been directly responsible for reducing crime rates in 12 neighborhoods, increasing college enrollment among at-risk youth by 40%, and providing legitimate opportunities that have pulled hundreds of young people away from criminal recruitment. Agent Martinez pulled out photos that showed construction projects, scholarship recipients, community centers. All the work Victoria had been proud of, all the achievements she'd been convinced were corrupted. Mrs. Sterling, the criminal organization that targeted your family did so because your foundation was destroying their ability to recruit victims and operate in communities you were helping to strengthen. Victoria felt 23 years of charitable work recontextualized, not as naive generosity that had been exploited, but as effective community building that had been threatening enough to criminal operations that they'd invested months in trying to destroy it. They tried to convince me that my work was causing harm because it was actually preventing harm. Your work was preventing so much harm that criminals saw you as a major threat to their operations. Victoria looked around the FBI field office, seeing real federal agents coordinating a real investigation, seeing Marcus receiving medical treatment while still handcuffed, but no longer looking like a criminal, seeing the fake agent Chen unconscious and facing charges for impersonating federal law enforcement. Agent Martinez, Victoria said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Of course. Victoria looked directly at Agent Martinez, seeing competence and integrity and the kind of authentic federal authority that the fake Agent Chen had been mimicking. Do you believe that my foundation's work, my community projects, my charitable activities, do you believe they've actually been making a positive difference? Agent Martinez smiled with genuine warmth. Mrs. Sterling, I believe your foundation has been one of the most effective crime prevention initiatives in this region. The criminals who targeted you tonight weren't trying to exploit your work, they were trying to eliminate it because it was too successful. Victoria Sterling stood in a real FBI field office, surrounded by legitimate federal agents, facing the man she'd been married to for 23 years, who just shot someone to protect her from criminals disguised as law enforcement. The woman who'd been psychologically tortured into believing her life's work was criminal had just discovered that her life's work was so effective at fighting crime that criminals had tried to destroy her rather than compete with her. Her foundation wasn't corrupted, it was threatening. Her marriage wasn't built on lies, it was being destroyed by people who wanted to eliminate her community impact. And her own strength, her own refusal to be manipulated, her own decision to call for real help instead of accepting fake authority, that had been the key to exposing criminals and protecting the work that mattered most. Victoria pulled out her phone to call Rebecca, to call Harold, to call everyone who needed to know that the Sterling Foundation was not only legitimate, but so successful that criminals had been willing to invest months in trying to destroy it. Because sometimes the greatest compliment you could receive was being targeted for destruction by people whose crimes you were preventing. And sometimes the most powerful foundation you could build was one strong enough to survive attacks from people who understood exactly how much damage it was doing to their ability to harm others. Victoria Sterling had spent the evening learning that real power wasn't about managing crises. It was about building something so effective at solving problems that the people creating those problems would go to extraordinary lengths to stop you. The question now wasn't whether she was strong enough to continue her work. It was whether she was ready to accept that her work had been more successful than she'd ever imagined. 3 months later, Victoria stood in the same ballroom where her daughter's wedding reception had been destroyed, but this time the space was filled with a very different kind of celebration. The Sterling Foundation's annual scholarship ceremony was in full swing, with dozens of students and their families celebrating achievements that had once been tainted by doubt, but were now recognized for their true impact. "Mom," Rebecca said, approaching with her 3-month-old daughter Sarah in her arms. "Are you ready for your speech?" Victoria looked at her granddaughter, named after Agent Martinez, who'd become an unexpected family friend, and felt the deep peace that came from building something real instead of managing something false. "Almost ready, sweetheart. Is your grandfather here yet?" Grandpa Harold is at the head table with Agent Martinez and Senator Mitchell. He's been telling everyone about the new community center design. Victoria smiled, thinking about her father's resilience. Harold had not only survived the psychological manipulation and fake death threats, but had emerged from the experience more determined than ever to build structures that strengthened communities. The trauma had brought them closer together, not driven them apart. "And your father?" Rebecca's expression grew complex, not angry, but thoughtful in ways that suggested real growth. "Dad's here. He's been talking to some of the scholarship recipients about the financial literacy program he's developing." Marcus's journey back to trustworthiness had been slow and authentic. After spending 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from his gunshot wound, he devoted himself to rebuilding their family's financial integrity and expanding the foundation's impact. The man who'd once humiliated Harold publicly now worked quietly to amplify Harold's community contributions. "Mrs. Sterling?" A young woman approached with obvious nervousness. "I'm Maria Santos, one of your scholarship recipients. I wanted to thank you before your speech." Victoria recognized Maria, a student who'd been on the fake Agent Chen's fabricated list of criminal recruits. Seeing her healthy, successful, and grateful provided daily proof that the foundation's work had never been corrupted. "Maria, how are your studies progressing?" "I'm graduating next month with a degree in social work." "Mrs. Sterling, I wanted you to know that your foundation didn't just pay for my education. It saved my life. Without the community center, without the scholarship, without the support network you built, I would have made very different choices." Victoria felt tears threaten as she realized that Maria was describing exactly the impact she'd always hoped to achieve. "Maria, you saved your own life. We just provided some tools." "Mrs. Sterling, there's something else. The other scholarship recipients and we've been talking. We want to establish our own foundation when we graduate, to continue the work you started." The proposal hit Victoria like sunlight. "Maria, that's wonderful. We're calling it the Next Foundation, because your work gave us the foundation to build the next generation of community support." Victoria felt the perfect symmetry of it. Young people she'd helped now choosing to help others, creating a ripple effect that would extend far beyond anything she could build alone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator announced, "please welcome Victoria Sterling, founder of the Sterling Foundation." Victoria approached the podium where, 3 months earlier, Marcus had humiliated her father in front of their entire community. Now she stood in the same space, but as someone completely different. Not the perfect corporate wife managing her husband's reputation, but a woman whose own work had proved strong enough to survive sophisticated attacks from people who understood its power. 3 months ago, Victoria began, many of you witnessed a moment of family crisis that seemed to destroy everything our foundation represented. Tonight, I want to share what that crisis actually revealed about the power of building something real versus the weakness of tearing something down. Victoria looked out at faces that reflected the full scope of her community impact. Scholarship recipients, construction workers from Harold's company, local officials whose neighborhoods had been strengthened by foundation projects, families whose lives had been improved by work that had proved its worth under the most intense scrutiny. The criminals who targeted our family didn't attack us because our work was ineffective. They attacked us because our work was so effective that it threatened their ability to harm the communities we serve. Victoria paused, seeing nods of understanding from people who'd watched the foundation's work proven legitimate by the very investigation designed to discredit it. Tonight, I want to recognize the Real Foundation our work is built on. Harold Chen, whose construction expertise has created spaces where communities can flourish. Rebecca Sterling, whose next generation will inherit a world where charitable work is measured by authentic impact rather than social appearances. Agent Martinez, whose investigation proved that real law enforcement protects legitimate community work instead of undermining it. Victoria's voice grew stronger as she recognized each person who'd contributed to something larger than any individual effort. And Marcus Sterling, who learned that real partnership means amplifying your spouse's strengths instead of managing their reputation. Victoria looked directly at Marcus, seeing the man she'd married, but also someone evolved through consequences. Humbled by his mistakes but committed to redemption through action rather than words. But most importantly, I want to recognize all of you, students, families, community members, who prove that when people are given real opportunities, they create real change. Victoria gestured toward Maria and the other scholarship recipients. These young people are establishing their own foundation to continue this work, which means that everything we've built together has become strong enough to grow beyond any individual founder or family. The applause that followed felt different from social politeness. It carried the energy of people who'd witnessed something genuine survive an attempt at destruction. 3 months ago, someone asked me about foundations, Victoria continued. About what it takes to build something that lasts. Tonight, I can tell you that real foundations aren't built by individuals who manage crises or control narratives. Victoria looked around the ballroom, seeing Harold's proud smile, Rebecca's determined expression, Marcus's quiet commitment to doing better, and dozens of faces representing communities strengthened by work that had proved its worth. Real foundations are built by people who choose to solve problems together instead of creating problems for others. They're built by people who measure success by community impact rather than personal credit. They're built by people brave enough to continue building even when others try to tear down their work. Victoria stepped back from the podium, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from having built something strong enough to survive attack, something meaningful enough to inspire replication, something real enough to continue growing without her constant management. As the evening continued around her, Victoria found herself standing with Harold, watching Marcus play with baby Sarah while Rebecca coordinated with the scholarship recipients about their new foundation. "Dad," Victoria said quietly, 3 months ago I thought my life's work had been corrupted by people I trusted. Tonight I'm watching that work inspire the next generation to build their own foundations." Harold smiled with the quiet pride of a man who'd taught his daughter to build things that lasted. "Victoria, real foundations don't get corrupted by attacks. They get strengthened." Victoria felt the truth of that settling into her bones. The Sterling Foundation hadn't just survived the criminal conspiracy. It had emerged stronger, more focused, and more effective than ever. "Mrs. Sterling?" Agent Martinez approached with a folder Victoria recognized. "The final report on the investigation. I thought you might want to see the complete scope of what your foundation prevented." Victoria opened the report, seeing statistics that made her chest tight with pride and purpose. Crime reduction rates, educational achievement improvements, community development metrics, all demonstrating that the work she'd been convinced was harmful had actually been transformative. "Agent Martinez, this says our foundation's work prevented an estimated 400 young people from criminal recruitment over the past 3 years. Mrs. Sterling, your foundation didn't just help people. It actively disrupted criminal operations by providing legitimate alternatives that were more attractive than illegal opportunities." Victoria looked around the ballroom at scholarship recipients, at families whose neighborhoods had been improved, at young people planning their own charitable foundations, and realized that real power had never been about managing other people's perceptions. Real power was about building something so strong, so meaningful, so effective at solving problems that it inspired others to build their own solutions. Real foundations weren't built by controlling narratives. They were built by changing lives. And real love wasn't about managing each other's reputations. It was about supporting each other's growth into people worthy of the trust they shared. Victoria Sterling had spent 3 months learning that the most devastating attacks could reveal the strongest foundations, that the most sophisticated manipulation could be defeated by simple refusal to be controlled, and that the most powerful revenge against people who tried to destroy your work was continuing to build something that made their destruction impossible. As the evening wound down and families headed home to communities made stronger by work that had proven its worth, Victoria realized that this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Because foundations strong enough to survive attacks were foundations strong enough to support whatever came next. And Victoria Sterling was ready to spend the rest of her life discovering what real power could build when it chose creation over destruction, community over control, and love over manipulation. The woman who'd been humiliated at her daughter's wedding had become the woman whose work was inspiring the next generation to change the world. Some foundations, once properly built, lasted forever. What did this story teach you about the difference between real power and the illusion of control, and the possibility that our greatest strength comes not from managing how others see us, but from building something so meaningful that it survives any attack? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.